Good morning. Today, I'm super excited to be here with you, Jarel, and for everybody that is watching and will eventually watch. Jarel Loveless has been a longtime friend of Utopia, and Jarel, you are currently what is your position and your title right now? What are you doing in the world?
Chief Development Officer at Annie Malone Children and Family Services.
And we connected with Jarel. Let's go through the backstory.
Yeah. It's a fun one.
Yeah. So how did we connect? And then after that, I'd love to hear, even before that, like what led you to where you are now.
Yeah, so gosh, we got connected during the pandemic, actually. The Association of Fundraising Professionals, the St. Louis chapter, had a last minute change where they decided that they needed some help to pull off our annual conference. So they called you all with like 7 days before the conference started. And it was one of those, okay, let's pull this together with no time whatsoever. And then they actually brought me in to MC the whole thing. And that's how we originally connected. And it was such a fantastic event. It went off without a hitch, I think, which speaks volumes to what your team did, which was just one of the miracles that you all have worked. And I'm sure we'll get to the more recent miracle that your team worked with us at our agency a little bit later. But yeah, that's how we originally got connected.
Well, first off, I appreciate the way that we got connected. And that sort of, that was the catalyst for us having numerous opportunities to work together over what would be the next 18 months. But I'm genuinely curious. By the way, I think as highly of you, and our team thinks as highly of you as you think of us. And we feel, and we talk to fundraisers, all over the United States. We've worked with groups from sea to shining sea, and you really stand out. That's not to say that others don't have, that's not to say that others don't have incredible superpowers, but there's something about you that, gosh, a lot of people can learn from you and the things that you're doing because of the way you think about connecting with people and relationships, the power of relationships and what you're doing in your organization. And we'll get to that in a little bit. Mm-hmm. But how did you get there? Like, talk to us about the backstory. Who is Jarel, and how did you find yourself where you are now?
Yeah, so I actually started out my career as a journalist. So I spent a little bit of time as an investigative reporter out in North Carolina. So did some work out at Fort Bragg, right outside of Fort Bragg, with the 82nd Airborne while they were deployed. And this was the mid-2000s. The industry was in a little bit of a transitional phase, we'll call it. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to come home, hit the pause button, and just take a job to hold me over until things died down, because I had some other job opportunities that were out there from other newspapers across the country. So I thought, I'm going to let these come in, make my decision from there. But then I took what was supposed to be a temporary contract position in nonprofit that was a 3-month contract. And here I am 15 years later. I just fell in love with the industry, but it was one of those things where the skills that I had as a journalist just translated so well to a career in fundraising and nonprofit. And that's the thing that I've learned with almost every fundraiser that I've met over my career. We all wanted to do something else, but then we fell into this career one way or another, but then also fell in love with it. So, gosh, it's been stops all over the place, whether they be local, St. Louis Science Center, St. Louis Art Museum, University of Missouri, St. Louis, or in the national site, most recently with Teach for America, both regionally and nationally, where I served as a consultant for some national teams as well.
What does it mean to be a consultant at a national nonprofit organization?
So for us, and for my team at Teach for America, I personally had 18 different fundraising teams to work with. So that meant understanding that what works in one location won't work in another location. So let's say that I'm working with an office down in Miami. Well, a certain phrase means, so let's say school choice. School choice means a very specific thing depending on where you are. And politically, it means a different thing. And your political alignments go different ways when you hear that phrase. So it meant that we had to keep our ear on the ground and have a good pulse of the communities that we worked within and be mindful of that. So I think that's one of the things where consultants kind of fall short is being mindful of the communities that they work within. They just look at it under the same lens for every organization that they're engaging in.
So with sort of expanding and unpacking communities further, you now work in a community that was incredibly vibrant, right?
Yeah.
Like the Ville area where Annie Malone is currently headquartered. Back, 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago, that is where, people were migrating to. It was booming. It was robust. What is it now? And how are you working on revitalizing and revamping that part of the St. Louis community? Because I think what you're doing is really incredible.
Yeah, well, I'd say two things. It's both heartbreaking, but also hopeful is what I feel when I entered the community for the first time as a staff member late last year. So full disclosure, I didn't grow up in the Ville. So I wanted to come in rather, and immediately get to know the community. So what we did, we had focus groups where we were able to engage community members directly. And I was able to hear directly from them, both what they know about Annie Malone, but also where they thought Annie Malone might contribute to the community. So that's been one of the things that I've been really mindful of is how can we be a good neighbor? So that is probably at the top of my list, obviously outside of fundraising. Fundraising is my main responsibility at the agency, but I also want to think, how can we build up the community? So that means providing services to community members that might be temporarily experiencing crisis and getting them to a place where they're safe, they're secure, but then they're ready to give back themselves. So for instance, I actually just had a fantastic conversation a couple of weeks ago with someone who graduated from one of our programs. She now turned around and she sent a check. And the check was her son had started a business, and he gave the proceeds from his business, and he said, "Mom, I want to give it to Annie Malone." So they wrote the check, sent it in, but it was because they were so grateful of the services that we provided, and they were now in a place where they could give back and they could be a pillar within the community as well. So that's my goal. That's our goal with what we do. We want folks to go through that transition, that process where they're in a better place, and now other community members can rely on them and lean on them, because we'll all experience some sort of difficult time in our lifetime. And it's up to a community that surrounds you within your personal network, but then also your geographical network to support you through that. But then once you're out of that moment, now it turns back to you. What can you provide in the future for someone else who might be experiencing a difficult time?
Sure. And how do you build relationships like that? Like what, there are some things that you and I talked about prior to going live that I really want to unpack, and I guess we can just see where the conversation goes. But how are you currently working to build relationships like that? Because I think it all ties back into what you said a few minutes ago. We fell into fundraising, and then we fell in love with it because of some reason. And I think part of that for you is really seeing the benefits and the fruits of your labor coming back to the community. The reward that you get from seeing a check from a young business owner wanting to give his profits back because of the way you made him feel and what you were able to provide for his family. How are you building those relationships in your community?
I would say it's being authentic. What folks can sense is if you enter a space, a historic space like this, and you're not authentic about your compassion for the residents, but you also don't listen. So for me, it's listening. It's really entering, and I don't have a solution. That's not what I'm coming here to do. My original move is to just come in and get to know you all, get to know the community, hear a little bit of history. I mean, I've learned so much history that I've never seen in any books or anything along those lines from just sitting down with longtime residents. Like yesterday, I had the opportunity to meet with someone who's lived in our community for 71 years. And I mean, she's a walking encyclopedia of the history, but then the people. So I feel like it's entering with a genuine care for the folks, and they can sense that. And I think about some time that I spent as a journalist. We were researching a community in Southern Illinois, Cairo, Illinois, and it was the same thing where the residents, they were a little standoffish when we originally entered the community. But I went down there almost every other day for a year and a half, and I really got to know a lot of the residents. And I would literally just park my car on one side of town. I'd take out my notebook and I would walk. I would walk for hours. So I burned through so many pairs of shoes through those 18 months where you just see things when you walk that you don't see when you drive because you're slowing down, you're taking everything in, but then you see folks on either on the porch, you stop, they want to talk. So the same thing as we enter communities, just getting to know them from a space of, I'm not here to be a savior, I'm here to help you build your community up to what it can be and what it should be, what it deserves to be.
What are the biggest challenges that you're currently facing as a fundraiser?
Gosh, oh man, how much time do we have? It's a lot, and I think the industry is going through a little bit of a struggle currently because there are two trains of thoughts where there are folks who are just deeply ingrained with the idea of this is how we fundraise for decades and decades and decades. So this works, this is proven, without giving thought to how society has changed and how things are hopefully continuing to change. So how can we be more inclusive in everything that we do? So I'd say one of my struggles is honestly the diversity of the industry as a whole. Not many folks look like me, and not many folks that look like me have lasted within the industry as long as I have. So that's a personal challenge of mine. Industry-wide, I think folks are still recovering from the pandemic, especially on the corporate side. So corporate giving, it's been a wild year, man. I actually just had a conversation with one of our corporate donors earlier this week where he fell off the grid for 6 months. And he called me back and he's like, I'm so sorry for the delay. Things were a little crazy here on our end, too, because we just didn't know where we were financially. And the first thing that gets cut is the philanthropic budget. So we saw that from a lot of folks where, instead of this $25,000 commitment, now they're only able to do like $5,000 this year, or maybe they suspend it altogether. Folks are rethinking their finances. Maybe they're tightening things up a little bit. So that's one of our challenges. And one of the big challenges throughout the pandemic was figuring out how to engage people digitally. How do you engage people digitally? Because if you, and you all are quite aware of this, but with your line of work, but at the beginning, we just had all these virtual Zoom happy hours. If I never have to do a Zoom happy hour again, I will be a very happy man because they ran those into the ground so incredibly quickly. So then the challenge became, how do we engage people in an exciting way that actually is connected to our mission, which I know we've talked about right before we started recording.
All right, there's two things to unpack here. Number one, you mentioned corporate donors, which is a conversation that so many people could benefit from hearing, and how you're engaging corporate donors, specifically global corporations. And the second thing I want to touch on is engaging people digitally, because you're doing something that is so simple yet so profound that so many organizations have not figured out yet. So I want to come back to that. Not that they haven't figured out, they're not implementing it into their practice because they're focused on other things.
Yeah.
So the first thing is, how do you go about recruiting these huge global organizations and making them a part of, your mission?
Yeah, so I'd say, and that last word is the key word, mission. So when I originally got into fundraising, corporate fundraising felt so much different. It was one of those things where they would write a check one time a year and they'd be done, and that's it. And there wasn't the idea of, like a partnership, so it was literally, I remember when I started
That's huge.
15 years ago, where I would literally just pick up the phone and call the administrative assistant to the CEO. And then she'd be like, yeah, okay, I'll take care of it. I'll go see Joey, and then you write the check. And then we have no real contact outside. You might come to our gala, or you might come to one other event throughout the year. But now it's transitioned to thinking about how do we build a true partnership. So that's how I've approached it with these larger companies. And it's not just thinking about, okay, they have a lot of money, they employ a lot of people. Let's talk to them. Sure, let's talk to them, but let's try to prioritize, because we're all short on time as fundraisers, nonprofit employees. So let me prioritize. What values do each company hold? Does it align with our mission? Is there some sort of alignment? But then how can we build a partnership that makes sense, that's mutually beneficial?
Yeah.
So really being thoughtful about that. So in this instance, let's think about the community that we sit within. Let's think about what brands are at the top of their list in terms of being recognizable. But then let's also look at their commitments across the globe, internationally, to causes like ours, communities like ours. That's a great starting point for a conversation.
So you're doing the research.
Yes.
You're figuring out what matters to them, what their values are. You're sort of going after the individual who sort of is representative of these values, and you're striking up a relationship with one particular individual in the organization that allows you sort of a foothold to get in.
So I'd say for every partnership that I build, I'm looking for that internal advocate, the person on the other side that's going to go to bat for us. Because I can only do so much from my seat, and I can do a lot from my seat, but to have it come from my seat and then someone else that has a direct pathway to the decision makers within the organization, oh, that's gold. So, I think about times that, let's say, I'm figuring out how to engage a corporate board or something along those lines that I've done in the past. Let's put folks on that board who have direct lines, and they have the ear of decision makers at the organization. So they understand our mission from a very deep lens, and then they can turn right back around and say, okay, I work with Annie Malone. Here's why we should say yes to this proposal. So it's really being mindful of what we can provide. And for me, I look to provide professional development for our corporate partners. And, let's look at the emerging leaders within your company. I can put them to work on my side. They grow their skill set, they grow their Rolodex, things like that. And they come back to you in a much stronger place. So mutually beneficial partnerships, that's what it's about for me.
I had a conversation with an organization a couple of days ago. And when you talk about partnerships, I think that one of the challenges for many groups is they don't really know. So how to unpack this? They're offering sponsorships, hoping to get numbers, right? And so we asked, one of the questions we asked on the call the other day, we're talking with this group, right? And they just secured this incredible sponsorship. And they said, hey, as a benefit for your $10,000 sponsorship to our gala, you get to bring, 2 different tables, a total of 20 individuals. And we're like, wow, that's great. Now, how are you going to strike up relationships with these different 20 individuals prior to them showing up to your event, so it doesn't become the opposite of what you're looking to create? And like what you just alluded to a minute ago, number one, it's creating these corporate partnerships, but number 2, it's not just offering sponsorships for the way of having numbers, right?
Yeah.
And where I'm headed with that is that we all feel like events are sort of they're one arm of many different vehicles that you can use in fundraising. But what is your approach to getting the right people in the room, as opposed to just selling a sponsorship and hoping that you'll have numbers? And then when the money's not raised, you're like, well, the event sucked. Right? So like how do you get number one, how are you looking at events differently? Because there's so many different ideas
I
that I have
know.
on this
Yeah.
paper here, but
Yeah.
let's just go. Okay,
Yeah,
so
we'll start there.
yeah. So number one, how are you looking at events differently?
So I think the first thing is your event actually an event that you should have? Because I think there are two types of events. There's like a capital E events, so your galas, your big, your big time investment, your big event of the year. But then there are lowercase e events, which I think of as more of the informal things like tours. How can you engage people directly in the mission? So for us, those lowercase e events look like school tours, tours of our crisis center, things along those lines, where there's so much lower cost involved and time commitment of staff. So when I say, is your capital E event worth it? It's one of those things. Okay, so we look at the money that we raise from an event, but oftentimes we don't think about the staff time that's dedicated to that event. So are you calculating that into, like how much money that we make? So for instance, in the example that we used earlier, let's say I put in 300 hours to plan this gala or 5K. Let's use a 5K. 300 hours to put this in. This 5K raised $15,000. Woohoo, great. But let's say I spent 200 hours devoted solely to fundraising. So like pounding the pavement, picking up the phone, engaging folks digitally, like we'll talk about, but engaging as many folks as possible with our mission and our organization. I'm going to raise a heck of a lot more than $15,000. So you need to be very mindful of what's your overall goal, not just a financial goal, but what's your goal for having this event? Are you having a 5K just because every other organization in town is having a 5K or a golf tournament, or do you actually have a reason to have this event? So I think that's a good place to start this.
So you're then suggesting that you, instead of spending 300 hours on an event, perhaps you spend 100 hours on an event and then allocate 200 hours to picking up the phone, calling your donors, going out and meeting your donors and figuring out what matters to them.
Exactly. Yes. I think there are ways to have a large impact with an event. And it doesn't have to be the fanciest, craziest gala. For some organizations, it does. Let me be clear. Like I've worked at some organizations where that's a very important part of what we do on an annual basis. But for some of these smaller organizations, maybe there are ways that we can, instead of bringing together 250 people in the room at once, how can we break it down into smaller groups? So let's think about things like corporate groups. Let's figure out how we can engage them. Maybe there's a volunteer day where they can come in on our end. They can help the teachers prepare for a school year by setting up their classroom. So now they have this connection to our mission, direct connection to our mission, but then also they're seeing it, like close up in a way that an event doesn't offer. Capital E event does not offer. But then also when it's time for them to go back to the office, they have this wonderful photo opportunity of all these folks and, name large St. Louis company here, t-shirts, painting classrooms, setting up classrooms. So when it comes time for me to connect with them at the end of the year, I have this picture I can take to leadership, the decision makers, and say, hey, here's how we engaged your company last year. Through your contribution, this provided XYZ. So we have our impact reporting, but then we also can figure out, okay, here's how we did this employee engagement, because employee engagement is so important to a lot of companies these days, and volunteer opportunities.
You're not just asking for the check like we just talked about a few minutes ago. You're not just asking for a sponsorship and then hoping they're going to fill 2 tables, right?
Yeah.
You're saying that's great if you want to sponsor us and get behind us. And as a benefit of being a sponsor of ours, let us bring your employees in and show them who we are and what we do and why that matters. Yeah. And then as a result, their hearts are open. They're empathetically attached to your mission. They care more. It's a win-win, right?
It really is. And that's the mutually beneficial thing that I'm mentioning. they get out and they want to volunteer. People are really thirsty to volunteer. Like my phone rings so much these days at work with folks with corporate groups that want to come in and provide any sort of support that they can now that they're vaccinated, now that things are starting to reopen. So let's take full advantage of that in a way that leaves them in a good place. Because, when you think about events, we've all been to a million events where you have the same generic dinner, you hear a speech from the executive director, you hear a board member, then you hear, one person that's been affected by this organization. And it's really formulaic. And those are nice, but they're not necessarily the types of events that you walk away from and you think, oh, dang, I'm going to double my gift to the organization next year.
Yeah.
The way that you double gifts to the organization next year, you get people in person, with these tours or with the corporate volunteer days where they get to, one, meet kids up close and personal in a lot less formal environment. There's like this idea, I just feel different, if I'm in a t-shirt and shorts painting at an organization as opposed to sitting in a tuxedo, eating a kind of bland dinner, watching a video. Two distinctly different feelings. And the former is the one that leaves my heart in a good place when I think about why. Why do I fund this organization?
So you, if I'm hearing you correctly, you use your events as a platform to bring in the numbers. And 90% of organizations perhaps don't pick up the phone the next day. And you mentioned this, right?
Yeah.
During our workshop,
Yeah.
something that you do that a lot of other fundraisers that you've worked with don't do. And that's they're like, oh my God, the event's over. Woo, I can finally relax. And you're like, no. Now it's my time to go to work. And you're on the phone on Monday calling these donors, setting up these meetings, getting these volunteers in the door so you can then, attach them to your mission. Right.
Yeah. So I think of events not as fundraisers, but as wonderful prospecting tools. So it's great that we have money coming in from events because that's necessary. We need that to keep the lights on and doors open to provide our services. But at the same time, for me, like you said, the next day is the big day. So actually, after our event that we did together this spring, someone called me and she's like, are you off work today? Then I was like, no, this is the most important day. I'm not taking off until, next week. So I literally spent the entire day on the phone calling every single sponsor and thanking them. But then also I prepared in advance. I prepared some talking points. So what are the three big things that I'm going to say in these conversations? So, okay, we had 17,000 viewers across, XYZ. We raised this amount of money, but then here's what's next. And I think that's the important thing is figuring out and putting that planting that seed rather, what's next? Because instead of thinking of this big event as the end, let's figure out a bridge, how we can bridge this relationship from not just event to event on an annual basis that they come back as a sponsor every year, but let's figure out a plan how we can engage them throughout the year leading up to the next event. So I always like to plant that seed with every single sponsor that I talk to, like, oh, hey, you can expect to hear from me later this summer. I'll have some fantastic volunteer opportunities for your staff. And that way they're already thinking about me. So when the phone rings, it's not like unexpected. When they receive an email, it's not unexpected. So I'm always leaving them in a place where they know what they're going to get from the next conversation from me.
Beautiful. Wow. How do you engage people digitally? So we talk about a couple of different mediums of reaching out to these different donors and sponsors. Before we went live, you talked about, sending video messages, and I know that's become a big part of your routine.
Yeah.
So how are those working, and what are the video messages that you're producing and sending?
Yeah. So two different things, and gosh, I love video messaging because for me, the best part of the job is saying thank you, and it's like the easiest part of the job. So when I came on board, the first thing that I said, actually I had said this throughout the interview process, I want to build a world-class development team. So that doesn't mean that we're going to raise $100 million in the next year. Hopefully it does. Maybe there's a donor out there. Maybe there's a donor out there that wants to give us $100 million. But with that being said, maybe it's creating a donor opportunity and a donor engagement strategy that really speaks to them. So what can we do to keep them engaged throughout the year? So these videos. So it's a really easy thing to do to make a personal touch. So let's say that you donate it to the organization and you receive your tax letter from us. You receive everything that you look to receive from every organization that you make a donation to. But are they sending you a personalized thank you video? So for me, I literally just post up in my office. I book some time every week on the calendar where it's like a thank you block. So I'll I'll set my microphone out just like this, and I'll sit in front of my computer and just spend an hour saying thank you to people and giving them updates. So for you, let's say that you donate it to our school. So I can say, thank you so much, Joy, for a gift. Last year, we had 112 students go through our Emerson Academy. And then I dropped more talking points into that, where you know exactly where your dollars went, but then also the impact that your dollars had. But it speaks in a different way than just a plain kind of stale letter.
Sure.
So it gives a little color because you see my name, you see my signature. You might not have met me in person, but those videos make it a lot easier for you to pick up the phone when it's time for me to call you and ask for the next commitment or to ask you to come visit us. I can now, it's almost like you know me a little bit. So it adds a much more personal feel because I want our donors to get to know all of our staff. So that's been a really big goal of mine, is to make sure that we're featuring our staff members, the stories of our staff members, because they're the ones that are doing the work out there with our kids on a daily basis. So let's let the donors get to know them. So through these videos, I've started texting donors. So we have a system within our CRM that allows me to send text directly to donors and send them links. So let's say, okay, so I send you this video, and I know that you're interested in a school. Now I'm going to text you. If I have your phone number, I'll text you a link to some pictures. Let's say we're in summer school right now. I'm going to text you a link to some summer camp pictures. Let's see if you open them. So I get all these data points along the way so I can see how you are choosing to engage with us. So I can build that profile on you so I know how to engage with you moving forward.
What CRM platform is that, just for other groups so we can recommend it?
Yeah, we're on Network for Good.
Okay. Network for Good.
Yeah, fantastic.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, shameless plug. And honestly, I was raised on Razor's Edge, and I am a Salesforce guy at heart. I love Salesforce, but I think, for smaller nonprofits, for small to mid nonprofits, Network for Good is fantastic. The video functionality is flawless, great quality videos, and the texting. It's just painless with how it's integrated.
I love that you're prospecting using digital media. And we've been doing this for a couple of years now, where, there's so many competitors in your field. There are 1.6 million nonprofits in the United States competing for the same dollars that you're competing for. And we have a couple thousand competitors across the nation that are trying to do similar things that we're doing. And, for us, it's like, hey, what makes us what puts us in a position of being uncomfortable and also helps us grow as a result? And it was like, oh, let's do a live stream, because it puts you out there in a way where, you're using digital media, you're getting your message out there, and it gives us an incredible opportunity to connect with individuals like you who, not only are you a client of ours, but we have this relationship now, and you're a friend, and you have an opportunity to educate and inform other people that are listening and watching, like videos, and using these tools, repackaging it, repurposing it. Like, we could create 100 pieces of content right now off of this video alone and send it to, create a workshop and have 50 people come underneath you and learn from you. And so digital media is not only a great resource for prospecting, but it's an unbelievable resource to get people engaged because it piques their curiosity and they can learn. And anyway, it's a great education tool as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's for me, I think about it, the competitor thing. What you say is 100% correct. So I think about how can we be different from everyone else? Because folks are giving to multiple organizations. Yeah. So they're receiving the same thing from every organization, the same tax letter, the same thank you letter. You're getting invited to the gala. So what can we do to set ourselves apart? There you go. Yeah. The digital side.
Yeah, I love it. One of my dear friends and mentors says, when you are trying to be better than another organization, you're competing with your ego. When you're trying to be different, you're competing, in a totally different paradigm.
Yeah.
And so how do we continue to evolve and to utilize and leverage relationships to get to know people, to build our business? That's how you build incredible brands. It's all through relationships, scaling relationships.
Yeah. And I feel like, to get back to the idea of being genuine, like building relationships within the community and wanting to provide value, there's that side too. So for you all, especially the value that you can provide through workshops, through things like these live streams, I mean, that goes so much, that goes so far. And, on my end, when I'm looking to who am I going to engage for our hybrid event? Well, let me take a look at all the folks out there. And then that's how you guys set yourselves apart. So yeah, I definitely give that a lot of thought day to day with how we operate on our end too.
Sure. Follow your different.
Yeah. I love it.
Opposed to, it would be very, very easy to do everything else that everybody else does. And then you're operating in what we refer to as the red ocean strategy, where everybody is competing for, the same business in this particular area of murky water. But there's this big, incredible, beautiful blue ocean out there where there's no competition. And that's where we go. And it looks like that's where you go as well.
Yeah, I think about that on the fundraising side too. So, there are the big players in town, the big companies. And when folks are talking to us, it's like, oh, have you talked to this large company? Yeah, we have, but so has 5,000 other nonprofits. Yeah. They've talked to them too. But when I think about partnerships, okay, who exists in our space that's less popular or a smaller name that still might have the budget to support us? We've had a lot of success with those folks. Bringing them on as corporate supporters as well. So let's look for that pocket of folks that have money who aren't getting engaged on a daily, hourly, minute by minute basis. And let's strike up a relationship with them as well.
Sure. Where else do you want to go?
Oh my gosh.
We got 6 minutes left.
Yeah, there are so many directions. Gosh, what have we not touched on yet? Because we cover a lot before we even start the stream.
I know. Well, we talked a lot about events not tying back to the mission, and I think that's where we should end.
Okay,
because one of the things you said was, okay, so you do this, this parade every year, which is an incredible event. I think it's very unique in and of itself. But you said one of the challenges that you're currently facing is that your donors are over here and your attendees are over here. What are the things that are going through your mind as you look through the evolution of your events at your organization, and why does that matter?
Yeah, gosh. And for me, that was one of the things that has weighed heavily on me since day one, because I feel the just a great level of responsibility, but also I can't even put that into words. It just leaves me. One of the few times that I'm speechless is when I think about what the legacy of my organization is, but then also the rich history. So the parade, 111 years old, the second largest African-American parade in the country. So we're not changing that because it's lived that long for a reason.
Sure.
But when I think of some directions that we could go, how do we have the parade and build a bridge between, to build that bridge analogy again, between our donors and then the parade itself. So, parades as a fundraising vehicle, not my favorite, I will admit, but let's rethink it. It doesn't have to be a fundraising vehicle. It can be an opportunity to bring the mission and to spread the mission to as many people as possible while raising some funds. So when I say it's not a fundraising event, that doesn't mean we're not making money and we're not setting out to make money, because I do with everything that we do, because we need to. But I'm talking about how can we tie the mission back. So I think about, and one of the things that we talked about was my goal of ensuring that our agency is a good member of the community. We've sat there for 130, going on 134 years now. So I just feel that rich history every day when I walk into the office, and when I meet people like the donor yesterday that has lived in our community for 71 years, So I think about how can we be a good community member to her? So that's just through our programming. So what we can provide. So how can we reimagine the parade to remain what people have known and loved for all this time, but then also reimagine it into a way that we can use it as a vehicle to provide additional services for the community. So that might be a preview of, how we're trying to rethink things. And more to come on that, I'd say. But, I'd say too, and I just actually did a webinar on this with a different professional organization a few weeks ago, thinking about how we can visually tie the mission into what we do. So, for instance, with our events that we did together, there's one particular scene. So the very last one where I was on stage with our COO and we're saying thank you. So I thought, okay, well, how can we wrap this program in a way that will give viewers and attendees in person just a glimpse into what we do and who we serve? That's not just a static video or just a dance group or something along those lines. Well, let's get someone from our crisis center. So we brought up a 4-year-old, that has been directly impacted by the services that we provide. So that's how I started to build that bridge to tie it from just this event to mission-based. And when you look at what ran the next day, the picture that ran front page of Post-Dispatch, front page of St. Louis American, the picture that you saw was that one that we're very intentional about creating. So that's how, I'm very mindful about how we can build in that bridge between event, mission, and remember like the visual aspect of it as well along the way.
So it's really bringing the recipients that are benefiting from the work that you're doing into the space allowing people to not just build a relationship with, the videos and the experience, but really to build that relationship individually with the recipient or your client.
Yeah, yes. And I'd say, the thing that I would want to stress for people is to not really get into, and I've always called it like a trauma porn or something along those lines, where you present people in a way that feels very, it just feels gross. You know what it is when you see it, but it's got to be, and again, to be genuine, it's got to feel genuine. And she was, our 4-year-old was adorable. And, it was a genuine moment where we genuinely wanted to show, here she is. She's so cute. She's so happy with us, things along those lines. So my rule of thumb, the way that we talk about people and our clients and the communities that we serve, if we can't say it in front of them, or we would feel uncomfortable saying it in front of them, then we shouldn't say it. So that's why I'm very intentional when I say last year, our agency served more than 500 children and families that were experiencing a crisis. So that's intentional in the idea that that's not forever.
Exploiting.
Yeah, it's not forever. And they're going to get out of that crisis with our help, with the community's help, but then also with themselves as well. So I'm really intentional about that language, and I really want to avoid exploiting our communities. And I'd say when I talked earlier about the reckoning that the industry is going through right now, that's one of the things is how do we talk? What language are we using as we're engaging donors? So want to stress that one too.
Love it. Intentional languaging.
Yeah.
All right, let's wrap it up there. Last but not least is just one piece of advice that you would give to a fundraising professional that is watching.
Gosh, I would say always be open to change. I think as an industry, we get so stuck in our ways. Like we've had this event for 15 years, or we've had the same event for 20 years. So let's keep doing it. No, let's look at what works. Let's look at what doesn't work. And let's go from there and figure out how we can adapt and fail. Don't be afraid of failing. Fail fast.
Yeah. Fail fast and fail forward.
Yep. You bet.
Love it, Jarel. Thank you so much for coming on. It's a pleasure every time we get a chance. Every time we get a chance to connect together, you just bring so much light, so much passion, so much energy, and so much wisdom in your space. So we love you, everybody. I speak for everybody at Utopia. I really speak for myself here saying, but I'll just go ahead and speak for them as well. But we genuinely love you. We love your partnership. We love your friendship, and thank you for coming here and spending some time with us today and sharing your wisdom with everybody else.
Thank you so much. And I love you guys as well. And, it's always so fun to talk shop with you. So I know we could go for hours and hours, but I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. That's a wrap. Enjoy the weekend. We'll see you next Friday.